Well, his hypersonic nuclear warhead, Satan II, is allegedly set to be deployed by the end of the year and could strike Britain in just 3 minutes. It's the latest threat from Putin as he continues to use every tactic in his blood-curdling playbook to bully the world as he wages war in Ukraine. With blockades of grain shipments set to spark an international food crisis, if not lifted within a month, and rising fuel costs creating economic misery, Putin is no stranger to threats and blackmail. But how worried should we really be? Meanwhile, today, EU leaders meet to offer Ukraine membership of the bloc, something that for now is largely symbolic. But is it a whitewash as Europe continues to give 30 times more to Russia for fuel than it does to Ukraine in support? And how much longer will this war drag on? Or could there be a swift and deadly end? Well, joining me now to talk about this is Philip Ingram, who's a former senior military intelligence officer and NATO planner. Philip, always love having you on the show. Talk to us about Satan II and the latest rhetoric coming out of Russia.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. It's rhetoric. All intercontinental ballistic missiles have a hypersonic phase. What they do is they launch up into space. In space, they will distribute a series of independently steerable re-entry nuclear warheads, and then they drop down on a target. So they can target the UK at the moment within minutes with the missiles that they've got. Of course, the West is monitoring for any missile launches anywhere in the globe at any time. So and we've got a permanent at-sea independent nuclear deterrent, as do the Americans and as do the French. So if they tried anything like this, there are processes and procedures in place where retaliatory action would be virtually automatic. And Putin knows that. That's why there hasn't been a nuclear war since the end of the Second World War, and that's why there's unlikely to be one.
Yeah, it seems to me that Putin constantly wants to saber rattle, to create a kind of terror, to force other nations into submission. But it's really not working, is it? I mean, he's a bit like the boy who cries wolf. He's constantly coming up with these threats via state-controlled Russian media, via people like Medvedev. And yet, well, the world's starting to ignore him on that front.
It's a constant part of the doctrine. It's maskirovka, which is masking, all about deception, all about trying to saber rattle, and Varanya, which is just telling lies, and he's very, very good at that. And this is what they do. But it does upset certain countries because it creates division within countries that have not very strong political sort of support within them. So you get coalitions like in Germany. It can upset some of the coalition partners very easy. And Putin is using everything that he can in the information sphere, from the saber rattling with the big threats right down to influencing political decision-making, disruption inside different countries and all the rest of it. And he's putting all that together. And he's actually quite good at it.
Now, let's cast our attention across the channel to Europe, because, of course, the EU are set to welcome Ukraine as potentially a new member today. EU leaders meeting to discuss that. Do you think that this is, a good idea? I mean, essentially it's symbolic. It's going to take a heck of a long time, one imagines, for Ukraine to meet the conditions, be they economic or in terms of transparency and anti-corruption, to get full membership. But is there a risk that this also is whitewashing some of the, say, heel-dragging by the EU over really supporting Ukraine as perhaps it should be?
I don't think it's heel-dragging. I think it is providing support for Ukraine in the political sphere, and that will be putting additional pressure on Vladimir Putin. You're right in saying that it's going to take a long time before Ukraine will become a full member. North Macedonia got into the candidate status in 2005, I think, and are still not a full member. And Ukraine has been given a very clear roadmap as to what they need to achieve. And it's the sort of thing that President Zelensky was elected on. One of the biggest things is the corruption that existed throughout the country beforehand. Most of those involved in corruption are now in the front line, so have got a different focus. But that gives President Zelensky a real opportunity to achieve the standards that he needs to get a more rapid EU membership. Not every member of the EU is as enthusiastic about welcoming Ukraine as some, but it is a strong political statement.
Now, let's refer back to, I mentioned it in my introduction, the looming food crisis. I understand there's essentially 1 month, really, that we have to get this grain out of Ukraine somehow to go to parts of the world that desperately need it, or we're going to be facing famines. Are countries such as Turkey ready to work with its NATO allies on this matter? I mean, they've been deliberately belligerent about Sweden and Finland's membership of application to NATO. Are they ready to stand up and help, say, the British Navy and other Mediterranean countries make sure that grain can be escorted out of Ukraine's ports?
Well, I don't think any navy is going to set up, a free passage zone for grain to come out of Ukraine's ports with the Russian threat that's there. And Ukraine will be worried about lifting their minds whilst the Russian threat is there. In the same way that we're having difficulty putting a no-fly zone over Ukraine because it would bring us potentially into direct conflict with Russia. So, the grain issue and the cooking oil issue is a massive one, especially for the third world, and that will have massive unintended consequences, which is why the war, Russia's war in Ukraine, is a global conflict, because it is going to affect some of the poorest people in the world who are going to be starving to death. That will create more refugees and more people seeking asylum. That will put more pressure on different countries around the world, and this will go on for a long period of time.
And before we let you go, Philip, we were discussing just before this story bowel cancer and the fact that people aren't taking up screenings for it. And I understand that you are a survivor yourself of bowel cancer. Tell us your story.
I am. I got diagnosed in September last year after a routine test as you go to give blood. I've got an unusual blood group. It picked up that my hemoglobin was too low. And I went to my GP. GP sent me for another test and then started tutting when the test came back. And I was then rapidly put through the NHS testing programme, identified with what they thought was a fairly late diagnosis, bowel cancer, in a position in my bowel which doesn't usually give any symptoms. And had surgery in December. It was all taken out perfectly well. I was, if it's not too much detail, replumbed perfectly. And whenever the laboratory analysed the tumour, they found it was at the lowest possible grade. So they got it at the earliest possible stage. So anything that raises awareness, that gets people to go and get themselves checked, this can be dealt with very quickly and very successfully. And I don't need any follow-up treatment. I'll be a guinea pig for testing for as long as they want to keep testing me, but that just keeps me safe.
And we're glad you were kept safe, because we really treasure you on this programme. Philip Ingram, thank you for joining us once again. Always fascinating to hear your thoughts.